Welcome back to Healthy Little Moments podcast. I'm Dorota, and today we're diving into a topic that can seriously impact your peace of mind, which is your finances. Money stress affects absolutely everything: our sleep, our relationships, even our health. I don't know about you, but I've definitely laid awake all night worrying about finances. And so that's why this episode is just about the basics today: setting up budgeting, savings, building towards a more secure, calm financial future. So just a quick note before we begin. This conversation is based on personal experience and perspective, and we're not offering you financial advice. And we always encourage you to speak to a licensed financial professional before making decisions about your money. That said, I think you're going to find today's guest incredibly inspiring. So let's get into it. I want to introduce our guest, John. He is somebody that I actually met volunteering in Guatemala, and we just had the most life-changing, epic experience there. We volunteered with an organization called Living Waters International, where we are providing clean water to remote towns in Guatemala. The organization is amazing. They work all over the world. Anyhow, I connected with John. I called him the trip father. He was like the father of everybody there. My favorite story, John, is when I ran across the street, just like a block away, to use the bathroom. And John noticed I was gone, and he followed me to make sure that I got back safely, that I didn't get kidnapped, that I crossed the street safely. And I feel like ever since then, we've just been connected. John is a financial guru. I'm going to let him get into his experience and background, but we connected over our deep passion for financial wellness. When I started learning more about his story, just to give you a quick highlight, John worked what I would call a regular job. He supported his whole family, stay-at-home mom, which is like close to impossible, right, these days, and has been for the past few decades, and 3 kids. I have 1 kid. I don't know how people afford 3 kids. They're so expensive. And John did this, and he was eligible financially. He was set up to retire at 55. He stayed for a few more years because the company needed him, so he did that. But that is unbelievable in this day and age, because most people don't know how they're going to retire at 65 or 70 or have anything in retirement. And he was able to do it over a decade early. So that was a long intro, but I wanted to share about our incredible guest. And John, thank you for being here. And I would love to ask you to just jump into your story. Tell us how you did that. And, what is some of your mindset there?
Well, first off, Dorota, I just want to say thank you very much for those kind words. I really appreciate it. I think you're an amazing person also. When I met you, you've taught me so many things also, whether it was about better eating habits or better, just like you said, healthy way to live your life. So I definitely appreciate that. And it's helped me, and it resonated once I got back home, and the appreciation of just doing what we did together. And you were my teammate on the A team, I always call it. And as far as, yes, watching you get back safely, that's my overprotective dad syndrome. So, I'm flattered, to say the least. But it is my first podcast ever. So I am honored to be on this podcast with you. And I just wanted to discuss a little bit like how it all started. And I know I'm going to go back a little bit, but I was like 10 years old. And to give you an idea of the setting that I grew up in, I had immigrant parents. So I was first generation. I lived in a 2-family house in Brooklyn. My nonna, or grandma, lived with me. And, we'd sit around the table. Everybody's yelling and screaming and eating. It was always around the table. But I remember how my grandmother would always tell me that she was worried that we would go bankrupt and lose the house. And as a 10-year-old, I was terrified. And I said, I need to help my parents.
Yeah.
Out of all the kids, my 2 sisters and my cousin upstairs with his mom and dad, I was the one impacted by it the most. So I remember, and this is really funny because it doesn't really exist today, but I went into help wanted ads, like in the Daily News or
I remember those.
you remember that? So I'm looking to get a job somewhere. And I did. I found, this is the most ridiculous job, but I was selling metal Social Security cards. And if you think about how ridiculous that is today, identity theft, it didn't exist back when I was 10 years old. So that was like, 50 years ago. And I went door to door and I sold them for $2, and I kept $1. And I sent $1 to the company, and people today that still purchase these have them.
Wow.
It was those type of door-to-door things. I wanted to make money. So there's a reason why I'm telling you the stories, because
Yeah.
at that point, my mom took me to a bank and she opened up my first passport savings account. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it looks like a passport, but instead they digitally, well, electronically, they would put what you deposited, and every so often you'd go to the bank and you'd see there was interest accrued, and it could be pennies. But I was just so excited. So whenever I made money, I gave it to my mom and she would deposit in the bank. We'd go together. So I learned that. And from that point on, I think one of the neighbors was probably so tired of me ringing her doorbell and selling the next thing that she got me a job at 11 years old working in a shoe store.
Wow.
It's incredible. I loved it. I mean, I was 11 years old. It was right down the block. And this gentleman was from Italy also, and he taught me all about retail business.
Wow.
It was a changing um, event in my life, and the money became much more real, and
Mm-hmm.
and it was all cash. I was a kid, and I did that for 10 years. I did it through grammar school. I did it through high school. I did it through college, and I saved and I saved. Now, I didn't really know much about investing at that point, so it was always in a savings account. But I think
Right.
once I was in college, I got a break and I did an internship at Goldman Sachs because my sister was working there as a secretary. And I got this job and I started to get a little bit experience at a let's say a Wall Street firm. However, which I told Dorota this, is that I always said that I worked in the blue collar of the white collar. And what does that actually mean? Well, I wasn't on a trading floor. I wasn't in sales. I wasn't in any type of everything that's so exotic, Wall Street. I was basically supporting the staff. And to me, that was like the beginning of an experience that would take me to different levels.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened is once I graduated, they offered me a job there to do the same thing, and it wasn't a lot of money. But that's when my sister said, "Oh, there's a 401k," and I'm like, "What's that?" So I started to really understand it. And I go, I want to read about this. Now, people that were on the trading floor, they were all from Ivy League schools. And I was from a regular college. And I said to myself, all right, I'm first generation Italian American. I came from Brooklyn. How do I fit in? And I thought the only way I'd fit in is I'd start to learn. And that's one of the key things. You have to learn about
Mm-hmm.
investments. And I think that was the beginning. And I attribute it to, or I compare it to, how many of us, well, everybody has a cell phone. Do you really take the time to read about how to use the cell phone? Or if you bought a new car, the manual is sitting in the glove compartment for all the years. Do you really know everything that's actually the car has to offer to you? Probably not. So with me, 1K, I got deep into it. And within a couple of weeks, I called my sister and I said, what are you invested in? And she said, fixed income. I said, that's ridiculous. You're 24 years old, 25 years old. You need to be aggressive. We're young. You need to put this money away kind of religiously, and you have to be consistent, right? And at the end, you can't be buying and selling. You have to save. And that's how it started.
That's a powerful story. And we actually have a lot of similarities because I started working at 12 years old as well. I started my own babysitting business. I've been an entrepreneur, I think, my whole life. And there's an underlying theme here. And I remember using my savings to pay for a Red Cross babysitting course because I was like, okay, if I have this certification, I'm more marketable. And then I went to go market myself at a church. And anyway, long story short, I was 12. My mom also got me a savings passbook. And so I knew exactly what you're talking about. For those listening who might be younger, back in the day, it wasn't there was no digital banking. You had to write everything down. And I remember clearly the banker drew little balloons on it. And I was like, I'm going to be a businesswoman. I don't want this with balloons. It's not a cartoon. I'm not a child. Anyhow, I've worked ever since I was 12 years old. I had 4 jobs in high school. And I think it's really I say that because there's a level, to be completely honest, there's a level of grit that you need to have in order to be financially successful. I know we're going to talk about mindset a little bit later on in the show, but I think the reality is we're in a world today where instant gratification completely consumes us. It's the here now and not planning for the future and maybe making some sacrifices today to set yourself up properly later. So when I heard your story, I wanted to share that because we definitely have some alignment there of the grit.
Yeah, it's great. And I think you and I talked about how we've come from like almost a different world.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's the beginning. I mean, grandma saying to me something could happen to our family, I took it to heart. And
Yeah.
I always would say to my mom, I have money in the bank. You can use it. I mean, what? I mean, I don't even think my three kids, I love them to death, but would they actually say it? Maybe at this point. But I mean, they're probably thinking that, well, dad retired early. So does he really need my money?
Yeah.
But in essence, back then, we didn't really go on a lot of vacations and we didn't really,
Yeah.
we sacrificed. And that's the word, we're going to come up with a lot. But can we go back to saving? And I think,
Yes.
to your point, when I was going to college, I bought a 2-year-old used car and I spent $6,000 on it. I paid it cash. Now, think about where we are. That's 1981. So I'm not even going to talk about the rate of inflation, what that would equate to today. But the
Right.
gentleman that I worked for was incredible. He rewarded me because I just kept working harder. I was
Mm-hmm.
dedicated. I just kept learning the business. As a matter of fact, when I first got my full-time job, he offered to sell me that business. Now, I was
Wow.
making $18,000 and I couldn't afford what he was asking. So I said, no, thank you very much. I'm honored, but I can't do this. And I was kind of like you. I was entrepreneurial too. Mindset, however, I had the fear only because my parents were World War II survivors. And, you were instilled with this, you don't know what could happen. You could lose all your money tomorrow. And
Yes.
right? But I still had the gutsiness to invest aggressively. Now, the word saving, people always say, well, I can't save. I don't make enough money. I live paycheck to paycheck, right? Okay, saving for me is two different, I guess, definitions. One, save money to put, aggressively to grow in time. And by the time you're in your phase, you're going to have a good nest egg. The other
Mm-hmm.
saving is look at your expenses, right? You can save on your expenses. But nobody really does that. I mean, I've helped so many people, Dorota. I've sat with people, and I do this pretty much always for free because I want to give back. I want to share everything that I've basically learned throughout these past 40 to 50 years. I just think I want to give back. And I think you and I gave back by going to Guatemala. I mean, this is the
Oh
same thing.
yeah.
I think the reason why you and I hit it off pretty well is that that I'm sincere about what I want to do.
Yes.
Perfect. I'm not perfect. None of us are perfect. But if you take the time, you'll see that if you go through your cell phone bill, you go through your insurance bill, just giving you examples, your debts are high, refinancing debt. You'd be surprised how much money you can save on an annual basis. Take that money and invest it now. Now you do one saving to the next saving.
That is a great point, and I want to jump in because that's something I'm so passionate about. I have been actually doing that. So just a tip for our listeners, I've been doing that quarterly. Once a quarter, I sit down and I look at all of my subscriptions, reoccurring bills, and I call my internet company and I see if they have new specials. I call Verizon. I have Verizon Wireless and I look at my bill. I'm like, why am I paying this for 2 lines, for example? And you'd be surprised how much money you can save that way. So to your point, it's a great strategy to then put that into an investment. I have another friend she is just financially so savvy, self-made. She's on track to retire by 50, 55. And her strategy is every time she got a raise, she's basically been living on the same income for 10, 15 years. Every time she got a raise, she took that money and she invested it. And then her husband lost his job. So they've been living off of one income for probably, he lost his job, like, let's say 12 years ago. When he got a new job, they took all of his salary and invested it because she said, if we've been living for 2 years on one salary, let's continue doing that. And I thought that was genius. And it takes a lot of sacrifice,
Yes.
but they're doing it and they live in Brooklyn, actually,
Oh,
funny
wow.
enough, where you're from. Yeah.
Right?
And they
And
live
then
in
you
New
have
York, very expensive. place. So I want to kind of put this into buckets because what I'm hearing through your story, and we're going to kind of continue on that savings bucket, is first there's this budgeting income bucket. You got to figure out your budget. Where can you save money or make more money, which I want to touch on as well, right? So that's like the first bucket. It's almost like the foundation. Let's figure that out first. Second is like, okay, let's take that and save money and get used to living below your means. And then third is that investment bucket. So it's a financial journey. So wherever you're at, I'm hoping the listeners get something out of one of the three buckets. So going back to that budgeting income, somebody's saying, well, yeah, I'm cutting back. There's no more money. There's no liquidity for me to even save. I'm in the negative. I'm in the red. What would you advise that person as far as their income?
Yeah, I mean, so there's another element to that. I think you touched upon it about a few minutes ago when you said this society with their cell phones, it's instant gratification. It's about, I want the next cell phone. I want this. And, you don't care. Like you just pay for it because whether it's a question of, and I hate to say this, but my mom used to say, keeping up with the Joneses,
Yes.
yeah, that gets you in trouble. And I don't think people are, I shouldn't say it. I think people tend to have a hard time doing that because if they're shown as being a little bit more frugal or conservative, they fear, other people's opinions. And
Yes.
right? And I think that part, if someone is struggling to save, if you're in that position, you have to look at everything. You have to look. Now, if you're single or you're married and you're just starting out your lives, you have to kind of sit down and do a budget. And I've never done a budget, believe it or not. I had a good ballpark of where we were at, but I let my wife, who was a stay-home mom, God bless her, she did an amazing job doing that. It put pressure on me, but it also drove me to, let's say, find opportunities. Now, people talk, you'll have podcasts, and I listen to some of them that they talk about side hustles. I mean, that's a perfect example. I mean, if you are getting paid X at your job and you feel that it's not enough, and you've looked at your expenses and you're saying, I really can't cut anywhere, then it's time for you and your spouse, or just you if you're alone, is to try to come up with another way to generate income. I would always say that, I'm going to go jump back and forth because I feel like, I'll start getting this ADD going on here, but I think you could put me back on path. But I would say that sometimes when people they're trying to save, but then they don't they have to worry about like a rainy day fund, right? Now, what is that? Well, just to give the example of your friend's husband who lost his job, you don't want to get into a situation where you have nothing. So even if you do a little bit of savings, a couple of dollars a paycheck, and you put it into like a high yield savings account. Now we've been enjoying this plus or minus 5%. 10 years ago, it was barely 0.01%,
Oh, yeah.
right? You can find something that's going to generate a little bit of yield, but it's very safe. You should have 3 to 6 months just for
Yes,
that rainy day fund, right? Am I correct? And how are
absolutely.
you going to know that? Well, you're going to know it because you're going to have to sit down, go into your savings account, your checking account, pull down your debits. There's even AI apps and all types of software that you can implement to like budget yourself, to find out your subscriptions, like you mentioned earlier, to look at where you're spending, to kind of get a sense of, wow, we went out to dinner 3 times a week for the past 6 months. You got to
I Yes. Yes.
watch your Instagrams, watch your TikTok, watch Dorota. She'll give you quick tips on how to make excellent meals. And I've made them. I mean, we could all make them and they're healthy. You don't know what these guys in the restaurant are putting in their food. Yes,
Yep.
you want to go out with your spouse, you want to go out with your friends. I have no problem with that. But make sure you take care of yourself first and then have the extra money to enjoy yourself. You have to enjoy yourself. We're only on this planet, this rock, right? How long? We don't know. So you need to sit down and you need to do some homework. If you don't spend the time figuring out what you're doing, you're never going to get on track. And one funny point before I'm going to let you jump back in is I have a couple of friends that once I retired, that I admired all these people. They're very smart people. I always think of myself as a little insecure. That's why I tried to learn the financial literacy that we're talking about. And I was like kind of nerdy about it. I would just read and I found it like, oh, I'm going to have this conversation with Dorota and tell her about 529 plans or 4K and this. And there's so much more now. And, even understanding tax implications. How can we pay less taxes? All these things that I'm passionate about. But, I think people need to spend a little time learning about these things. And once you learn about it, then you start implementing it. You start building the confidence. And I digressed, but the couple of guys that called me up that are younger than me and said, Bart, how did you retire early? Like, how much money do I need? And I look at them and I'm like, you are smarter than me. That's not the question. You want to know what the actual question is that I'm going to ask you? How much are you spending a year? Then I'll tell you how much you need based on your return or based on, we'll get into that later. But yeah, I just find that fascinating that so many people have asked me that. And I can't say $1 million, $2 million, $10 million. If you're spending 80,000 a year when you're retired, then you don't need that much. If you're spending 300,000, you need a little bit more, right? You want your lifestyle to remain the same. Guess what? You're going to have to save more.
Yes, absolutely. And you touched on something that I'm so passionate about, which is keeping up with the Joneses. I want to talk about that a little bit because this is something that I felt pressure in my 20s. I was living on the East Coast near New York City, and I had a few girlfriends who I'm no longer friends with, kind of just our lives drifted apart, and maybe the story will shed some light on it. But I had one friend who was single mom, and she was driving a brand new Mercedes. She got a lease every 2 years, and her insurance and car payment at the time, 13 years ago, was $1,200, which is a lot of money for a single mom. And I remember going over to her house. It was during the winter time, and she had her heat off. And she's like, well, I'm saving money. I don't have money for these high heat bills. And I'm like, you don't have money, and your daughter is sleeping in a bubble jacket. You don't have money for heat, but you are paying $1,200 for a brand new Mercedes because she needed to look a certain way. And I don't mean this to sound judgy. This is just, we have just a different preference. And this is the same girlfriend who would make fun of me because I bought an Acura TSX, which for me, that was a really nice car. And I bought it from the dealer 2 years it was used. It was a lease return, and I got a great deal. I drove that car, till I needed to retire it. But because of that, I was able to save money to buy my very first house by myself in my early 30s. I was able to help my mom financially. I was able to take some amazing vacations. And I say all this because I want to touch on one other thing when I'm sharing this. There's this keeping up with the Joneses component, and you need to strip that away to find, and this is advice from, it's called Your Rich Life. It's actually a show and a book by, I think his name is Ramit. I love him. And for those listening, I'm going to link some resources in the show notes. So if you're interested in like just learning, like you said, John, everybody should learn about this topic and really consume content about it. But anyway, he always talks about finding out what is the one bucket that you do want to spend on, right? So, and again, not to keep up with the Joneses, but just for yourself. For me, for example, I'll give you a great example. I spend a lot on healthy food. I'm into health and wellness. I rather spend a lot of money on really healthy food now than spend on medical bills down the road. It's something I'm passionate about. I spend money on supplements. So those are things that I choose to, in my life, spend money on. But I save in a lot of other places. I am driving a paid off car. For me, that's not as important. And if that is important for you, then I encourage you to do that, right? If that's really something you're very passionate about. So I just wanted to touch on that just to bring it to life a little bit.
That's an excellent story to bring up because there's so many situations like that. And one point I want to add to it is that if you could afford to do that and you want to drive a really luxurious car and you want to pay the expenses that come with it, by all means, do it. But if you can't afford it, you have to think about, and I don't think people want to think long term. They want to think about, I'm living today, which I get, and I want to enjoy myself today. But if you're going to take this beautiful car and then you can't put the heat on, there's something wrong with that example.
Exactly. So you've got to find the balance, right? It's saving for the future. Find the balance. Life is all about balance. Save for the future and enjoy today. Go on a vacation, maybe once you have an emergency fund. But again, it's baby steps. It's building those blocks of your financial wellness. And you need to have an emergency fund before you could have a vacation fund and go on vacation. So, all right, I want to ask you a couple of questions because we're talking about this budgeting and the strategies around that, and we've talked about some of the mistakes. And I love that you talked about side hustles. So we're progressing along our little wellness journey here that we talked about. So there's short term, there's long term. How do they divide their savings goals? So somebody's like, okay, I'm making more income or I have a side hustle, right? I have a savings account with $2,000. Like, how do I grow that and then progress towards investment, which we'll talk about later?
Oh, that's a great question, Dorota. So, I think today when people get jobs, they have more choices on where to put their money. So it's not necessarily how do I put it? One size fits all. It's got to be catered. I don't know if the word is catered or adjusted towards how much money you're making, what's your financial situation right now. But I think what gets to be overwhelming for individuals, for couples, whatever, it gets overwhelming when you have someone come in and tell you this. You should save in your 401k. Now you have a kid. The kid is just born. Put it into a 529. And I'm just throwing these numbers out, but this is something that happens. Oh, did you save because you want to retire early? Then you need a rainy day fund. So now that's overwhelming. So I think we need to sort of compartmentalize it, like you said, these little buckets. Okay. So let's take an example. I'm a single guy starting out my job, and now I have all these choices. I have a K like we had, which was traditional, and then we have a Roth K, which is kind of new these past, I would say, 10 years. Don't quote me on it, but let's say 10 years. Now, people are like, well, where do I put it in? So when I talk to my kids, I'm like, well, when you start a job, you're probably at hopefully the lowest salary that you're going to be when you look at your life. Hopefully, okay? So at that point, you're okay putting it into a Roth. And why? And if I should explain it, but putting it into a Roth means if you make, let's just say you're making, let's just use hypothetical numbers, $50,000, right? And you come home with 40,000. You then have to take that 40,000 and put X amount into the Roth. So that's after tax money. And and now people are like, well, what's the benefit of it? Well, that Roth K will grow and keep growing tax deferred and tax free. When you retire, as long as you're 59 and a half, any money you take out of your Roth K is tax free. Unless the government changes it in the future, that would be a big no-no. But that's something that when you're young, put some in the Roth because it's after tax contributions. It can grow tax deferred for as long as you could triple, quadruple, it doesn't matter. But when you retire, you're 59 and a half, without penalty, you can withdraw it tax free. That's pretty cool. But
Yeah.
what happens when you're making six figures? Now you jump into a different tax bracket. And the more taxes you pay, the more beneficial I think it is to go into the traditional 401k. And why is that? That money, that same, let's say now you're making $100,000 and you have to put 10,000 in there. You don't have to pay tax on that 10,000. That 10,000 goes in tax free. So if you're in a 35% tax bracket, you just saved $3,500. That now goes in that. And when the company matches, that helps you grow your money. So I think it depends when you're looking at retirement funds, like the K structure. It depends on where you are in the tax bracket. Some people don't care. They just rather pay the taxes now because they figure when they retire, they're going to be in a higher tax bracket. Other people feel like, let me take the tax deduction now, put the money in tax without being taxed on it. It's a lot more than the Roth, but then I'll pay my taxes and maybe I'll be in a lower tax bracket when I retire. But we don't know that. We don't know if the government and these politicians keep raising taxes. By the time these kids retire, who knows what the tax structure is going to be? And then you're stuck paying that number. It could be 40%, but
Yeah.
it's money that you save. So there's a lot of stories on the internet and different social medias that would say, don't do a 401k. I wouldn't listen to everybody. I'm not saying you have to listen to me, but educate yourself.
Yes.
Look at what I said and go research the Roth 401k and your traditional 401k. That's step one in the process. All right. But what's the most important thing? You have to pay your expenses. So if you're living in an apartment, you're making 50,000. Well, maybe you have to look at apartments that are not as expensive, or if you're going to look, and maybe it's 2,500 that you have to pay first before you save anything.
Yep.
And then I would save, 10% or 20%, whatever you can save. The more you can save, the better it is. And when they talk about compound interest, that's something that I can't even get into now for the technicalities of it. But if you look at what that does, the power of compounding, it's
Yes.
ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Oh, yeah.
And you're going to see that you have so much money in such a, over 10 years and 20 years and 30 years. If you keep putting that $1,000 a month or $500 a month, you wake up one day, you're like, wow, I did it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just want to touch on compounding interest just for those who are not familiar with it, just really, really high level, because I was actually introduced to this when I was 22 and I started my corporate job. And I had who I call my work dad. So I have my Guatemala dad here. And I had a work dad. And he came up and he said, you started this job. And he had a daughter exactly my age. And he said, let me show you why you need to start saving. And he was our finance guy. So he actually put together a spreadsheet for me. He said, if you start saving at this age, at 22, only $200 a month, this is what you will have by retirement. If you delay it by only a few years and you start at 25 and 30, this is what you will have. And the difference at the end of the day was hundreds of thousands of dollars that you're leaving on the table by delaying when you start.
Absolutely. Albert Einstein actually said it was one of the most powerful things, that how it affects the growth of money. And just to give you, and
Yeah.
I think it's great that you'll add something at the end, but when you think about what it means, in essence, if you have $100 and you made, $5 on it, well, that interest the next time is based off $105. And then you make another, instead of $5, you're making $7. So now, you have, let's say, like $112. And then what happens to that? That same compounding now is not on the first 100, it's on 112. So as it starts to grow, you're not even doing anything. If you just keep adding that money, it just,
Snowball. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Yeah. Great example. Okay, so we've talked about, having a savings account, doing the long-term savings 401k, and I think it's a perfect transition to now talk about investing, which scares people. Every time I talk to somebody about investing, they are just terrified. They don't even want to touch it with 10-foot pole. So let's talk about this. John, maybe you could help us just take the fear out of investing for the listener. It feels scary for me. I now have a little extra cash, and I do want to say, I know that you'll agree with me, you don't need $10,000 to start investing. You could start small. So I would love if you could touch on that. And what would you suggest for beginners who
okay.
want to get started without risking too much and don't have too much money? Let's start there first.
Yeah, let's start where we were initially. Like, whoever you are, wherever you're working, you do have these great tools that most companies offer you. But I didn't touch upon another thing, is that it's important, because what you want to do while you're saving money, you also want to limit the amount of taxes you pay, right? You hear
Mhm.
about these, people saying tax efficiency or tax this or tax that. But the perfect example is, you put this 10 grand in this 401k, over the course of 12 months, it's automatically deducted from your paycheck, which is a great feature because it's not you taking money and actually moving it. This is on autopilot. You want a lot of things to go on autopilot. So
Yes.
right? Right? That's a good point. Autopilot. And what happens is, you do have other vehicles or instruments, whatever, that the companies offer you, that Dorota and I didn't have when we started our business. Now, I'm much older than Dorota. I'm not going to give away the age, but I'm saying that there's other choices too. You ever hear of an HSA? What is an HSA? It's a health savings account. I didn't have that. Okay. We had something called an FSA. It was okay. It was also pre-tax money, but I had to use it. So if I saved $3,000, I had to use it for my family if there was expenses that weren't covered. And then I got it covered with the 3,000 that I didn't have, that was never taxed. HSA is like a 401k that's going to last forever. It's also pre-tax money that gets in there. And what a great tool that is, because let's just say you're making, let's go with let's say $100,000. Let's just use round numbers. $100,000. You put your $25,000 tax free in your 401k. That leaves you with 75, and then you put another, just a perfect example, another 10,000 in your HSA. So that brings you to 35,000 that's been not taxed. $1,000 is now could be in a lower tax bracket. So now think about it. You didn't pay taxes on 100,000, which could have been 40 grand. You sucked most of that away into something that belongs to you forever. And by doing that, you're paying the balance, which is, I'm doing the math quickly, 65.
Yeah.
And whatever that tax is, even if it's at 40%, but it's not going to be, let's just call it percent, it might be 18 to 20,000. So now you just saved $20,000 that you didn't give the government. It's in your savings account. So when you start thinking about savings, I don't want to do it. I got to hold it till I'm 59 and a half. Look, you could take a loan out against it. I'm not encouraging that. Or if you really need it, it's a 10% penalty, but it's still less than the taxes that you would have paid on it. So
Yep.
I just think, I'm not getting too deep into it, but let's talk about what Dorota's asking. So my children, as soon as they hit 18, I said, all right, my daughter sat here at this desk and I said, we're opening up a brokerage account. You can go anywhere you want. I mean, we happen to open up a Chase called You Invest, which doesn't charge you any fees. And I used to work for JP Morgan, so it's a little plug for them, but I am retired now, so it doesn't matter. But that's what I'm familiar with. I also have a Schwab account. I think Vanguard, Schwab, Fidelity, Chase, they're all great entities, and I don't think you'll go wrong with that. But step one, open up a brokerage account. What does that mean?
Yes.
Doesn't mean that you're going to be paying anything. It's just that you have another place that if you have extra cash, you automatically send it from your checking account, which because you have direct deposit, and you place it in your brokerage account. Now, what is it going to do sitting there? Go ahead.
I'm interrupting.
Sure.
What if somebody's like, what do I need to open a brokerage account? I've heard this from a neighbor who was really scared. What do you need? How do you do it? You said a U brokerage?
It's called You Invest, which is basically, yeah, You Invest is basically means that I'm going to do all the trading. You don't have to do that. You can ask, like, there are advisors that work with you. You really don't pay these people any money, but like if you're at Chase, for example, let's just use that. I have a financial advisor that will sit down and we'll have a conversation. He knows that I'm well versed in it. And he knows that he's basically just assisting me. And I know the joke was he used to be my quarterback. That's what I call it. He's my quarterback, right? He's
I
calling
love
the
it.
plays, and I'm going to execute him. But we have a shared responsibility. I invest on my own. He has some stuff that I've given him money, but we won't jump to that. What I need you guys to do is to go to any bank. You could do it online. You can look up brokerage account for Schwab, for let's say Fidelity, for Vanguard, for Chase, whatever you want to do, go in there and say, I want to open up a brokerage account. It doesn't cost you anything. It's a couple of minutes, maybe half an hour. They ask for if you have a savings and checking account at any of the banks, I think every bank will enable you to open up a brokerage account. And you could almost implement where it's automatically putting in a fixed amount. If you feel comfortable with that, then do it. If you don't, then do it manually. But once you get this brokerage account, what's next? What's next? Well, my suggestion is if you really, really, really are interested in learning about stocks, then you need to do a lot of homework. But I started out investing in a index fund. And I think a majority of people would probably fare well without getting overwhelmed is to invest in an index fund. If you don't know what an index fund is, I'll give you an example. The S&P 500 stocks that trade in their index. That means when you purchase a S&P 500 mutual fund or ETF, which is like a mutual fund, but it's shares in the mutual fund, you now are part of this entity of 500 stocks, right? They say it's averaged between 8 and 10% over the last, let's call it 50 years, since the Great Depression, right?
Mhm.
So if you just leave it in that and you keep adding it, that's how I started. In 1985, that's how I started, Dorota. I started putting a couple $100 in the S&P, the Vanguard, actually, I'll be honest, the Vanguard 500, S&P 500. I still have it today. I've never pulled a dime out of it. Now, a key thing and the growth is exponential, right? It just, if you keep on doing it and it goes on autopilot, you're amazed. I used to have this automatic deduction from my paycheck to go into that brokerage account. I had also automatic deductions. You're going to laugh at this one, Dorota. I had automatic deductions for U.S. savings bonds. You know, the
Oh my,
E series. That's a joke right there. I could tell you right now, I'm actually cashing them out finally last year, and I got to do it this year. 30 years have passed, and now they finally matured, right? And the interest rates on them were ridiculous. You could double your money in 6 years.
oh
Double.
my God.
Well, the interest rates, and the reason why, when I say 6 years, it depends on if you are earning 10% on something versus earning 1%. The amount of
Yep.
time to double your money, obviously, is going to be reflected in that.
Right.
But yes, I would invest. I would tell all your listeners to start with index funds because you're very diversified. Especially S&P 500 has had a great track record. Has it had horrible years? Absolutely. We've lost 25 to 50%. But if you panic sell then, you're never going to catch up. So remember, when things panic like we've seen now with all this tariff talk, I actually told Dorota I purchased stuff. And look at today, right?
Yes.
Look at fast forward and see what happens. But people panic and they sell at the low. Come on. I mean, when you want to go buy a nice pair of shoes or a beautiful dress, aren't you buying it? Don't you feel better when you're buying it on sale or when
Yes.
it's full price? I mean,
Yes.
stocks go on sale too. And if they do, and you love a fund then, or you love an index fund, then that's the time to kind of put a little bit more. You can never time it. We can't time this stuff. It's in our hands. So I think the term is dollar cost averaging. What does that mean? Exactly what you and I talked about. Every month, put a fixed amount in. That's dollar
Yep.
cost averaging. Whether it's here or whether it's here, you're now 20, 30 years from now, did it make a difference what you bought it at?
Right.
Because you've averaged, you don't even know what you're average, but you can figure it out. And hopefully you've done well by doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thank you for sharing all that because I feel like you take these complex, scary words and break it down into actionable items that we can, implement and do. Like I love what you said, just open a brokerage account. I have a really funny story before we move on. I had an E-Trade account because of work. We got a a stock plan, right? We won't get into all the details. For whatever reason, they made a mistake and I made $100. It was some random $100 on some stock, and they put it into a brokerage account subcategory folder. It was a mistake. I didn't touch it, and I couldn't move it was a silly $100. I say silly, but I couldn't move it, so it was just sat there. The next time that I went to go open this subfolder is at $1,400.
Wow.
Now I can't tell you the timeline, maybe it was a year or something, but I was like, how did $100 turn into $1,400? But that is the power of investing. And I just want to share too that if your money is sitting in a basic savings account, which we all should have a savings account, but to your point, John, make sure that it's a high yield savings account.
Right.
At least you're making something on it. Because if not, but what's that saying? You're losing money, right? Because of
The
inflation.
power of inflation, I mean, not the power, but the inflation will erode your return.
Exactly. And I think that's important. So, the last kind of section that I want to touch on, which we've been really talking about all along, is just this financial mindset. So, what are some habits that you think are important for long term success?
I think it boils down to 5 words. So if you're
Okay.
listening to this, if you have a good memory, that's great. If you don't have a good memory, I suggest you either write it down or you're going to have to listen to this podcast again to get to the end of it. But I think it's and not in any specific order. But these are the things
Okay.
that I think Dorota and I really over the last almost 3 years, I would say, I've known her that we're lockstep in how we believe in this. And again, I think a little bit is I think our upbringing helped me to understand that when I had like cash for the first time, I really understood the meaning of money. Like,
Mhm.
I think my kids when they were younger, just to digress a little bit, they would say, "Daddy, how much do you make a year?" And I'm like, "It's not important." But no, really, I want to know, how much do you make a year? And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to tell you how much I make a year, but first I want to ask you some questions. How much does this cell phone cost? I don't know. What about this glass? I don't know. Do you know about daddy's car? Like, how much did that cost? I don't know. So if I told you that I made 100,000 bananas a year, what is that going to mean to you? They looked at me and they had no idea. So I think at a young age, when I was making this money and I had to go to the store or buy my mom, the first presents I ever bought my mom and dad, my mom, after I made this money, and I don't even want to get emotional on it, but I think I bought my mom a fake fur coat for Christmas, and my
Oh.
dad a some kind of watch. I don't even know, Longines watch, which is not even anything fancy. And I felt so proud.
Yeah.
11 years old. And I just felt like I knew that that's whatever that cost, it took me X amount of days to earn. So the 5 words I look at is number one, we touched upon it, was saving. Now, saving is in two categories. It's saving on investments, but it's also saving on expenses. So keep that in
Mm.
mind. Saving is not just put money away so you can make more money. It's about how can I lower and save where I can first so that I'll have the extra money to put it in the investments. Otherwise, you're living paycheck to paycheck, and there's no way you're going to magically have money to put into this investment. I think learning to me is very important. Learning is another key thing. You want to learn about this. A lot of people don't want to learn about this, but by
Yeah.
listening to Dorota's podcast, you are learning about this. Even if you take 1 or 2 points away, I hope you do. And you want to go on, like, I don't know, on the internet, like a finance Wikipedia version, you will see and learn not just from somebody else. You'll learn from either the IRS. You can look at tax structures on the IRS. They'll explain it. Or go into these sites with a brokerage. Once you have a brokerage account, you have access to many tools that you can learn. You want to know what municipal bonds are? You can learn that. You want to know what an ETF is? They'll tell you what that is. You want to know what an index fund is? They'll tell you it. It's just take a couple of minutes. Make it a Sunday morning. You wake up before you have your coffee and look at a category that you're interested in and go with that. That's the second point. I think the next one is like, you got to be dedicated to this.
Mm.
Dedication, and whether it's in a form of automatic rollovers into like the 401k, set that aside. Don't put a lump sum in, do it by paycheck. Because if you dump in $20,000 because that's year end and you want to meet the max for your 401k, the next day the stock market could crash and just lost 10 grand. So do it over time, be
Yep.
dedicated. And the other word is disciplined. So if you're disciplined, now that's also you're disciplined in your expenses and you're disciplined in your investments. But a disciplinary attitude takes work, and it takes the last word, sacrifice. Now
Mm.
that's something that nobody really wants to talk about. Why should I sacrifice? I only live once. Why should I sacrifice? Because if you don't sacrifice now, you might sacrifice later. Now, what does that mean? Well, at some point, if you want to retire early and you don't sacrifice now, you're not retiring early. You might have to work till 70 or 75. And if you're okay with that, you don't need us. But if you want to retire early, I can tell you this, if you're in your mid 30s, mid 40s, and you want to know how to retire early, just do the math.
Yeah.
Figure out what you're spending, look at how much you need, count like a 4 or 5% return. We won't get into this because that might be another episode on how we could take an X amount of money. And there's all these rules that people talk about, these financial advisors talk about, and we can get into that. But yeah, I would say keep learning, keep saving, be disciplined, be dedicated. And sometimes you got to make some sacrifices. And if you want to leave that out, that's okay too. But I think the other points are really instrumental in trying to get to that goal line that you want to cross that, well, finish line, I should say. Maybe you want to retire early. That's a goal. And I really think for me it was, and I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying talking to Dorota every once in a while. I'm enjoying being on my first podcast. And I hope you got something out of it.
First of many, John. Thank you. That I love the 5 terms. I wrote them down, and that is such a great way to wrap all of this up. So I thank you so much, John, for sharing your wisdom, your passion, your honesty, and your heart with us. This has been so helpful. I love how you take these complex topics and break it down. We're talking, just having a normal conversation about some topics that really scare people. So I really thank you for having that skill set to break it down for us. It's really important. Thank you.
Well, I can't thank you enough for having me and trusting me with your viewers. And I hope people just tune into you because you have a lot to offer. And I really would love to see you succeed also on this new journey that you're going through. And I love being just watching you from the sidelines too. But now I'm literally at the game. So
You're in the game. And John, I'm sorry to tell you, this is going to be one of many because I love this. I love today. So I'm already writing down other topics. So for our listeners, make sure to subscribe. If you want to hear more of John, we're going to pick his brain and we're going to get deeper into some other financial topics. If you want to learn, I'm already committing you, John. I'm sorry.
Awesome. I'm there.
And for our viewers, I hope today's conversation left you feeling a little bit lighter with some of these scary topics, maybe a little bit more in control, but most importantly, hopeful about your financial journey and about your financial future. And I want you to remember just to be kind to yourself, because none of us are born with knowing how to budget or invest. We learn and fail along the way, but we all have to start somewhere. So the fact that you showed up and that you're listening today, that is a huge step forward. And it means that you care and that you're ready to take the next step forward. And maybe your future might feel a little bit less stressful and more financially secure. So if you found value in today's episode, I'd love if you could share it with a friend or a partner, or maybe save it for yourself and revisit it in a year and see where you're at. So don't forget, in the next few episodes, we're going to talk about some of the other topics we touched on today. We'll dive deeper in them, maybe credit cards, maybe saving for your children. So I'm going to be working with John on that. But until then, take a deep breath and trust yourself. And thank you for being here. Have a great day.
Take care, guys. Thank you, Dorota.
Thank you, John.